Please welcome to the stage panel moderator for IRF, What It Is and What It Is Not, political correspondent, Real Clear Politics, Susan Crabtree, along with panelists, Massey College, University of Toronto professor Payam Akhaven, U.S. Ambassador at Large for International Religious Freedom Rashad Hussain, Chairman of the International Religious Freedom of Belief Alliance, Ambassador Robert Rehak, and IRF Summit Co-Chair, Ambassador Sam Brownback.
I just want to say, it is so amazing to see so many religious freedom advocates gathered here today when this issue is facing such a pivotal time in our world. I, as a national correspondent for Real Clear Politics, have the deep privilege to be able to cover this issue in depth, and that my editors are supporting me in this endeavor. Real Clear Politics has made a commitment to covering this issue when fewer and fewer reporters are doing so. And last year, we actually decided to dig a little deeper and commit to a poll with Emerson College. During that poll, we wanted to find out more about America's religious beliefs in an age of declining attendance at church. But we also found something really remarkable, that 94% of Americans support the fundamental concept of a religious freedom as a fundamental right. And you know, in this day and age, that is really remarkable that Americans can agree on anything at that level with such overwhelming support. But that's just a snapshot of where we feel, how we feel about the issue in America. And of course, at the summit, we want to take a more global view. So we have a wonderful panel here before you, and we want to talk about what really is religious freedom, how is it implied, and how important is it in this time of violence, hatred-fueled violence, and causing deep concerns across the world. Ambassador Brownback, I'd love for you to go first and talk about what is religious freedom and what isn't religious freedom in your view, and how important is this issue right now?
Well, thanks very much, Susan, for doing this, and thanks and welcome everybody that's here. To me, religious freedom is this defining issue between a free and open society. You can look at this issue and determine that. And the United States has built on this issue. It's an open society. We see it as a cornerstone human right. And you can look at China, a communist country, and this issue, religious freedom, is seen as an existential threat. That makes really this issue, this defining definition between a free and open society. Whether you honor this for everybody, or whether you see it as a threat to you and your power. And to me, Susan, that's just kind of the core piece of what this is about, is how you let people express their faith and live their faith.
Ambassador Rehak, would you like to go forward?
Yes.
Ambassador Rehak is the envoy for the Czech Republic on the Holocaust, interfaith dialogue, and freedom of religious belief.
Yeah. You know, I grew up behind the Iron Curtain, and we had a writer, you may know him, Václav Havel, who actually was dissident writer, and after the Velvet Revolution, he became president. And he said that freedom, if it's taken from anyone in the world, then it is taken away from mankind as such. That means that for me, freedom of religion or belief, first of all, it's a responsibility. We are in the free world. We have the responsibility to care for those who can't live and practice their belief freely.
So we have the current ambassador for religious freedom, Rashad Hussain, here. Honored to have you, Rashad.
Thank you.
Would you like to weigh in?
Well, thank you, Susan. Thank you to all of you who are here. for the work that you do every single day to cast a light on persecution that people face all around the world, and everything that you're doing to fight that persecution. And I was moved so deeply by the presentation on the Mayflower Church, and had a chance to be down in Dallas at DFW Airport, near my hometown, I should also say, to receive our guests fleeing persecution. The freedom of religion is enshrined as a principle in our First Amendment in the Constitution, and some of the founders of our country came to the United States fleeing religious persecution and seeking religious freedom. And it's such an important story for all of us because we have people in the United States from literally every corner of the planet that are here. And as they have the ability and the right to practice their religion, to not practice a particular religious faith, to change their faith, they seek to protect that right, not just here in the United States, but for people all around the world. They don't forget where they came from. And so we have an obligation, as enshrined now in the International Religious Freedom Act of 1998, to make sure that we're doing everything that we can to protect that freedom for everyone all over the world.
And Ambassador, I'm wondering if you believe that this is a cornerstone, bedrock principle in our foreign policy. And a lot of people say, oh, it's a soft priority, it would be nice, but it takes a backseat to economic priorities, national security. How do you view it?
It's absolutely an essential part of our foreign policy, and one of the aspects of integration that our office is involved in is ensuring that when discussions are happening on foreign policy in any part of the world, that we have representatives in the room that are making sure we understand the human rights implications and making sure that we understand how much our foreign policy and security interests are impacted by the need to protect human rights and the need to protect religious freedom. And one of the points of progress that I'm really proud of is that I can say that more than ever, the International Religious Freedom Office is integrated in part of those fundamental conversations. If you look at the last three genocides that have been recognized by the United States, the genocide of the Rohingya, the Uyghurs, the Yazidis and Christians in Iraq, you will observe that religious freedom concerns are critical to our foreign policy interests. And as Ambassador Brownback was alluding to, it's also very clear, and the data bears this out, that countries and societies that protect their religious freedom are more likely to be safe and prosperous, and countries that do not protect religious freedom are less likely to be stable. So it is an essential part of our foreign policy, and we see evidence for that all around the world.
That's right. Payam, would you like to weigh in? We have Payam Akhaven, and he is a former UN prosecutor at The Hague, and he serves as a special advisor to the prosecutor at the International Court currently.
Well, from a point of view of international human rights law, there is on the one hand the freedom of conscience, thought, and belief, which is largely about the prohibition of state interference and compulsion in one's individual convictions. But there's another dimension to religious freedom, which is often forgotten, which is the prohibition of incitement to hatred, which is also, in fact, an obligation under international human rights law. And my experience as a prosecutor who has been involved in crimes against humanity and genocide is that the persecution of religious minorities is very often the result of the instrumentalization or abuse of religion by those in power in order to justify authoritarian rule. And it goes back to the comments that you have made about the inextricable relationship between religious freedom and peace and stability, because we human rights activists are very often seen as naive idealists who are irrelevant to power realities and the like. So there's a very real consequence to allowing religious hatred and persecution to go unchecked. And of course, much of my experience has shaped my thinking on this. I'm a member of the persecuted Baha'i minority in Iran. My family has been in exile since the revolution in 1979. And that was a classic example of authoritarian, totalitarian regime instrumentalizing religion in a way which has actually nothing to do whatsoever with the true tenets, in this case, of Islam. And I've seen in my work as a prosecutor in Bosnia-Herzegovina with the persecution of the Bosnian Muslims, in Myanmar with the persecution by Buddhist majority of a Muslim minority, the Yazidi and Christians in Iraq, that no religion is immune from being abused, exploited, and instrumentalized in order to demonize and dehumanize others. And I will just end with one thought, which is the famous quote from the Canadian Supreme Court, which said that the Holocaust did not begin in the gas chambers, it began with words. So we have to take very seriously hate speech, just as we take seriously the freedom of religion.
That's a powerful statement. USAID Administrator Samantha Power, when she was a journalist, which I can relate to, obviously, she wrote the book, literally, on genocide from her experiences. And last fall, I covered her announcement that she's going to start infusing everything on the ground that USAID does with a religious freedom, the spirit of religious freedom, working with religious freedom partners on the ground. But that's not an easy task. And Ambassador, firsthand, Ambassador Brownback, how difficult it is to make it a priority when there's so many pressing world issues. How difficult is it to implement religious freedom in foreign policy?
I don't think it's that difficult, but you got to make it a priority. That's the issue. I grew up on a farm, and you feed your cattle in a bunk, and if you don't have enough bunk space, some of them get pushed out. What happens in foreign policy is the same thing. You got space for 3 to 5 issues. We've got to get in that space, and we've got to convince the people that do foreign policy that this is a core issue. This can help you solve genocide issues. This can help you solve security issues. This can help prevent the hatred. This is essentially about human dignity, which is the core of all of it, as my friend Jan Figel will talk so often. This is it, how you define your own soul and the right to do that. So I don't think it's that hard. I just think we got to get into the top 3 to 5 issues and make it a priority.
Ambassador Rehak, that's speaking to the United States foreign policy. How about in the Czech Republic and abroad?
Maybe I will start with the global. I'm a diplomat, and I saw that if you want to solve problem in certain district or area, you can't go just in the traditional way. We in Europe, we thought we should tackle politics, foreign relations, and so on, but you need a holistic approach. And religion, I see as a really tool for improving the situation. Religion as a source of stability and resilience. So that's why the diplomat should be aware of this excellent instrument of interface dialogue, which can help them to achieve their goals. And I'm happy that in our alliance we have 42 countries, mainly represented by the people at the State Department or Ministry of Foreign Affairs, and it works. And I see that also every year there is a more and more special envoys that are dedicated to freedom of religion. It's something new that was not before.
And Ambassador Hussain, you're living this right now in a time of deep conflict. How difficult it is? How do you think, you spoke at Samantha Power's announcement in support of her efforts, which I believe are pretty courageous to change sort of the culture at USAID. How difficult is that going to be?
There's been such strong bipartisan support for protection of religious freedom going back to the International Religious Freedom Act of 1998. And we have been given so many tools to advance religious freedom. We have a report, which I believe is the gold standard, which exposes violations of religious freedom in nearly every country in the world that we release every year. It really is a place where there are many religious minorities whose calls for help are neglected, unanswered. But that report is a place where people have a voice and where we recognize what's happening around the world. We work with countries on a bilateral basis on discriminatory laws and policies, including blasphemy laws, apostasy laws. We work in multilateral forums, the International Religious Freedom of Belief Alliance. We have the opportunity to work at the UN and the Human Rights Council. We've had such a strong tradition now throughout, across administrations. We're here because Ambassador Brownback began the ministerial, which we continue in the Czech Republic, and now we have the support of all of you in civil society. And I want to say that as we're doing this work, I have never been in a position where the support and the leadership of civil society is so important. So yes, it is critically important for governments around the world to be doing this work, but we can absolutely not do it without all of you, without every single one of you, without your support. And there are efforts that the government can take in the way that we craft laws and policies. But if you look at some of the violence that we see, when we talk about genocide, it's important, of course, we recognize that there have been genocides that have been officially declared. But then, if you go to a place like the U.S. Holocaust Museum, you see an exhibit on the path to genocide. How do you get there? When you see dehumanizing rhetoric from government officials and people in society around the world, and look, we can't ignore what's happening right now in the Middle East. And we have, for many, many years, rhetoric that has been dehumanizing. First of all, if you look at the events of October 7th, how do you get to a position where human beings can commit those types of atrocities against other human beings? The dehumanization that has occurred over long periods of time is unacceptable. And the same thing if you look at over 25,000 innocent Palestinians that have been killed. The dehumanizing rhetoric that's been used against them for far too long, including by some in the government. And we've called out some of those ministers in the Israeli government who have used that type of rhetoric. In order to address those types of abuses and the path that leads towards mass killing and mass atrocities, we're seeing some of that right now with the Hindu nationalist platform in India as well. You can't address that as simply by working as governments together. There have to be efforts made at a very concerted level in society through initiatives that we've tried to implement in partnership with civil society, such as the Istanbul Process 1618, the Marrakesh Declaration on the Protection of Christians and other minorities in Muslim-majority countries. So these are all projects that require significant government action, but also cooperation from all of you, the civil society leaders that are in this room.
Absolutely. And as we have these summits and we have increased awareness about religious freedom issues around the world, the first started with Ambassador Brownback, we have seen the situation worsen, as you've noted, as we see in the news today. A June report last year from Aid to the Church in Need found that more than 40 countries' religious freedom situation was deteriorating, while just 9 countries it was improving. Why do you think that is?
Simple question, Susan. Well, I think we see the world going in two seemingly opposite directions. On the one hand, we see the rise of divisive, hateful ideologies. But on the other hand, we see unprecedented integration and the inextricable interdependence of humankind. Once upon a time, the Canadian writer Marshall McLuhan spoke about the global village as some distant ideal. Well, today we live in a global village. You don't have to be idealistic to understand that. And I think that in a period of turbulence and transition, moving towards what Desjardins called the planetization of humankind, it's tempting to engage in this infantile regression, to go back to some imaginary past where we all had pure and simple identities. Well, that's not the way of the future. And that way of thinking will end up unquestionably in the trash bin of history. So I think we need visionary leadership as a matter of necessity, as a matter of survival. And perhaps I will just add one small point. I attended, as I do every year, COP28 this year, which was in Dubai, the UN Conference on Climate Change. And you speak to scientists about the regulation of the climate and how our existence as a species depends on maintaining a certain temperature. And you realize the utter folly of all of these divisive ideologies and wars, not just from a human rights perspective, but from the point of view of our collective survival. So that's why I'm still cautiously optimistic that these divisive ideologies are perhaps a momentary, though highly destructive attempt to turn the clock back. But the tide of history is moving us unquestionably towards planetization and transcendence of all these essentialist divisive identities.
I think we are almost ready to wrap up. So I'll ask one last question, and we want to end on a positive note, because we believe that the religious pluralism and tolerance sort of builds transcendent empathy. And that sort of springs from these values that we share in this room. So how can international religious freedom help move these numbers that we're seeing, the worsening situation in the world, in the right direction? Ambassador Brownback, would you like to?
Just real quickly, I think it's the grassroots movement that does it. I worked with the human trafficking, the anti-human trafficking movement for a number of years. It went grassroots and it really changed the things. I think this movement has to go grassroots where everybody claims, I have a right to do with my own soul what I see fit, and push the government and others to protect that right.
That's right. Ambassador Hussain?
Persistence. The work that we're doing doesn't produce the changes that we need to see overnight. And we have to keep at it and keep at it. When we make progress, you see responses to that progress, as we've seen in the world over the past decades. But good people of the world that want to address the oppression and the persecution that we're seeing, we just have to keep at it with collaboration from governments and civil society.
Ambassador Rehak?
We don't have time, but quick joke, because the Czechs are known for their sense of humor. And you are the people that like sense of humor. Wife is coming to her husband, Moses, and say, Moses, it's terrible. I heard in the market that the Messiah is coming, and we just finished the house, and our business is flourishing. And he look at her and say, don't worry. We survived the Egyptian Empire, we survived the Babylonian Empire, we survived the Persian Empire, we survived the Greeks, Romans, we will survive the Messiah either. Resilience is the word. The times are very bad. Maybe it's going to be even worse, but on the end, we will do it with our common efforts. Like the governments, civil society, you, everybody here, if we join the forces, we can overcome everything. Thank you.
I think that's a wonderful way to end the session here. Thank you so much for all of your perspectives, and thank you all for being here.